Imagine if depression, schizophrenia, ADHD, and addiction were not isolated labels but different branches of the same genetic tree. In this new Nature study, scientists analyzed over 1 million psychiatric cases across 14 diagnosed disorders to map that hidden tree. They uncovered 238 shared genetic loci and 5 powerful genomic factors that together explain about 2/3 of the inherited risk for these conditions. One factor links schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, another ties depression, PTSD, and anxiety, while others connect compulsive traits, neurodevelopmental disorders, and substance use disorders. This shared genetic architecture helps explain why people often meet criteria for more than one diagnosis and points toward treatments that could target clusters of disorders instead of only single labels.
Psychiatric comorbidity is not random. It reflects shared symptoms, shared life experiences, and shared genetic roots across mood, trauma, and psychotic disorders. Depression and anxiety often travel together, with overlapping problems like poor sleep, low energy, and difficulty focusing that can drain emotional reserves. After trauma, post-traumatic stress and major depression frequently co-occur because the same long-lasting stress pathways can drive both conditions. Schizophrenia and bipolar disorder remain distinct, but they share brain-level changes and a strong common genetic signal, which makes their boundaries harder to draw. These clinical pairings echo the research's genomic factors, where internalizing disorders cluster together and schizophrenia-bipolar disorders cluster together, showing how biology and symptoms perfectly align.
For a long time, psychiatry treated every diagnosis as a separate problem, each with its own checklist and its own treatment plan. People were left carrying a long list of labels, as if every condition had a totally unique biology. Genomic research now shows that this old model is incomplete. Many psychiatric disorders share genetic roots and common brain pathways, and high comorbidity challenges the idea of rigid diagnostic borders. Most genetic signals are actually shared across conditions, and 5 underlying genomic factors explain much of the inherited risk. Taken together, these findings support a unified view of brain disorders, where overlapping biology helps explain why so many people struggle with multiple conditions at the same time.
Here's the scale of this genetic deep dive into mental health. Researchers combined data from roughly 6 million individuals, including over 1 million people diagnosed with psychiatric conditions and about 5 million controls without those diagnoses. Within this huge population, they focused on 14 disorders ranging from depression, anxiety, and PTSD to schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD. This massive sample size gave them the power to detect subtle genetic patterns that single diagnosis studies would easily miss, revealing how these different conditions are linked at the DNA level.
Now that we know the study maps shared DNA risk across 14 conditions, let's zoom into 2 of the key genetic patterns. One factor centers on compulsive disorders such as anorexia nervosa and obsessive-compulsive disorder, with Tourette's syndrome and anxiety disorders contributing more weakly. A different factor reflects internalizing disorders, bringing together major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety disorders through a common genetic core. These 2 dimensions help explain why compulsive behaviors tend to cluster in some people, while intense mood and trauma-related symptoms cluster in others, even though all of these problems sit on the same broader genetic landscape of mental illness.
Deep in chromosome 11, researchers found one of the most powerful control hubs in the entire study. This hotspot stretches from position 112,755,447 to 114,742,317 on the GRCH37 map and includes the NCAM1 TTC12 ANKK1 DRD2 gene cluster, a group of genes tied to dopamine signaling and many psychiatric traits. Within this stretch of DNA, there are 17 significant local genetic correlations across 8 different disorders, making it the most pleiotropic region in the analysis. This single hotspot helps connect psychiatric risk with differences in thinking ability, personality style, substance use tendencies, and even sleep patterns, acting like a master regulator for mind and behavior. Think of dopamine as your brain's chemical volume control for motivation, pleasure, and focus. The DRD2 receptor helps regulate how much dopamine is released and how strongly brain cells respond, keeping the system in balance and shaping reward signals. When dopamine activity drops too low, people can feel flat, tired, and unmotivated, as seen in depression, attention problems, and anhedonia, the loss of pleasure. When dopamine activity runs too high, the risk for psychosis, manic energy, impulsive choices, and early stages of addiction climbs, especially when substances artificially spike dopamine levels. Many psychiatric disorders linked to the chromosome 11 gene cluster involve this delicate dopamine system, showing how tiny shifts in brain chemistry can reshape mood and behavior.
In this genetic map of mental illness, the same DNA variants do not stress all brain cells equally. For schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, shared risk genes are most active in excitatory neurons, the brain's amplifiers that boost and pass signals through circuits in the hippocampus and deep cortical layers. For internalizing conditions like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress, risk genes instead cluster in oligodendrocytes and related glial cells, which wrap and insulate nerve fibers to keep signaling fast and efficient. This split means that even when two people carry overlapping genetic risk, one person's most vulnerable cells may be the amplifiers, while another's weak point is the insulation, pointing towards cell-type specific treatment strategies. In this genetic story of mental illness, one gene can whisper into many disorders at the same time. Researchers found 238 specific genetic loci that each influence more than one psychiatric condition, showing broad pleiotropic effects across the diagnostic spectrum. Some variants in calcium channel genes, such as CACNA1C, are linked to bipolar disorder and other psychiatric phenotypes, while dopamine pathway variants are tied to substance use disorders and attention deficit traits, shaping very different behaviors from the same molecular roots. This kind of evidence shifts the focus from chasing separate labels toward targeting shared genetic vulnerabilities that drive comorbid conditions and could guide more efficient treatment development across multiple diagnoses. When we put all of this genetic evidence together, a powerful message emerges for people living with more than one diagnosis. Depression and anxiety often co-occur because they share a deep genetic foundation, with over 100 chromosomal regions contributing to common biological vulnerabilities rather than random bad luck. Bipolar disorder and schizophrenia also show strong shared genetic risks, clustered across dozens of chromosomal regions, which is why genomic studies frequently group them together. Understanding whether your difficulties load more on internalizing factors or on schizophrenia bipolar factors can guide more precise, targeted treatment strategies tailored to your pattern of vulnerability. Your stack of diagnoses therefore reflects a coherent shared genetic pattern, not a character flaw or a failure on your part. Comorbidity is biology in action, not a personal deficit. For decades, traditional psychiatry moved in a straight line from symptom to diagnosis to treatment, often without touching the real biological causes. This large cross-disorder genetic study shows that conditions like depression, PTSD, and anxiety share internalizing factors, while schizophrenia and bipolar disorder share a separate excitatory neuron factor, forming distinct but related genetic families. The future model of precision psychiatry starts with those genetic factors, then maps them to shared brain biology, and finally designs treatments that can stabilize entire families of disorders at once, such as boosting oligodendrocyte health for internalizing conditions or supporting excitatory neuron stability for schizophrenia bipolar risk. Drug development can then focus on these common genetic pathways, not just on individual diagnoses, bringing more targeted and potentially more effective options to people who live with complex comorbidity. Alongside the 5 specific genetic families, the researchers also uncovered a powerful general risk signal called the P factor. They identified 160 genome-wide hits for this P factor, representing genetic loci that cut across all 14 psychiatric disorders rather than belonging to just one. This shared liability shows particularly strong genetic correlations with neuroticism, self-harm, and suicide attempts, pointing to a core tendency toward negative emotionality. Many of the genes behind this pattern are especially active during fetal brain development, suggesting that very early neurodevelopmental processes help set the stage for broad vulnerability to later mental health problems.
Genetic clues from this study show that a lot of psychiatric vulnerability is laid down long before symptoms ever appear, during fetal development and early childhood when the brain's basic architecture is being built. Across the P factor and the main disorder families, many risk genes switch on most strongly in the developing brain, especially during late pregnancy and the first years of life. That is why secure attachment, stress reduction, good nutrition, and rich cognitive stimulation in early life are so important. Supportive environments can interact with these genetic trajectories and help steer them toward healthier outcomes. Early intervention and nurturing care cannot change the DNA itself, but they can reduce how strongly these inherited risks translate into later mental illness. The next step is bringing these genetic discoveries into everyday mental health care. Early in life, risk screening could use genetic information to flag children who might be more vulnerable so they can receive support before serious symptoms appear. In adulthood, genetically tailored treatments and integrated data-driven diagnoses could replace guesswork with therapies chosen to fit a person's specific genomic profile and overall risk pattern. Clinicians could also use family-level genetic insights, new drugs that protect oligodendrocyte health for internalizing disorders, and targeted prevention programs for high-risk youth to reduce the impact of inherited vulnerabilities across generations. This new genomic map of mental health shows that having more than one psychiatric diagnosis is not random bad luck, but a predictable consequence of shared genetic vulnerabilities. The same biological factors that link depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and substance use problems also leave a matching fingerprint in brain structure and function across diagnostic labels. As science continues to chart these shared genetic landscapes, treatment can shift from chasing isolated symptoms to addressing your personal pattern of genetic risk, turning your brain's blueprint into a guide for more precise and compassionate care.
Subscribe to BioTuber Online and unlock unlimited potential to improve every aspect of your health. Find real solutions for weight loss, blood sugar management, heart health, and mental resilience. Plus, science-driven answers for balancing hormones, boosting immunity, supporting healthy aging, optimizing digestion, managing pain, and preventing chronic disease. Learn to recharge your energy, enhance sleep, sharpen memory, and build strength through trusted fitness routines and nutrition plans grounded in the latest medical research. Explore topics like gut health, stress reduction, inflammation control, women's wellness, men's health, skincare, mindful living, reproductive health, bone and joint care, and integrative therapies. No matter your age or goal, this channel simplifies cutting-edge studies and expert insights, offering practical tips for total wellness, physical, emotional, and social. Join the BioTuber Online community for step-by-step guidance, actionable strategies, and daily motivation you can rely on. Subscribe now for evidence-based content and never miss an opportunity to thrive in every area of your life.